was invented in 1946, and the very first attempt to modify a hurricane comes less than a year later. Project Cirrus involved the U.S. Army, Navy, Weather Bureau, and the General Electric scientist, which was Bernard von Witt, seed the first tropical storm ever on October 13th, 1947, with 180 pounds of dry ice dropped by aircraft. There's a lot of conjecture about Project Cirrus, after the fact. So the story goes like this. Well, there was this atmospheric shelf, so it would have changed direction anyway. So what's the big freaking deal? The U.S. Army, Navy, and some GE scientists were out there screwing with a tropical storm that then turned into a hurricane that then changed freaking colors and direction and killed a guy and did millions of dollars in damages.
So hurricane force winds. And here's the latest model. This is the European model showing you that core of the storm just offshore hours, but a very small deviation in the track.
Now, if you look at the track there, that son of a bitch looks like it was pretty much headed out to sea. But that's a pretty freaking odd track. And the fact that they did inject their human hands into the natural process, you break it, you buy it.
Turbulence. First pass over the marina, we can see firsthand the devastation. The boats sunk in their slips, the cats flipped over, and the tipsy seagull missing. Off to our right and see quite a few of the Bahama Beach Club second floor units are missing their roofs entirety. Making another run at the marina, we realize that our iconic tipsy seagull is not standing.
2009 in one of her first articles that she wrote back in 2012. In it, an administrator from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, working in the sub-department called the Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, in quotes was corresponding with Homeland Security's version of DARPA, their own Advanced Research Projects Agency, wherein they discussed a little-known project called HAARP. In quotes, that is the Hurricane Aerosol and Microphysics Program. Who the hell approved that project and forgot to tell the public anyway? Something like $64 million in taxpayer money was up in the air, and they were talking about reviving Project Storm Fury, which had run, officially that is, from 1962 through 1983. Some of the old-timers were even recruited for the new effort, but mind you, the technology has progressed and things are no longer based around seeding the clouds with silver iodide. Things are now steered with advanced electromagnetic waves, plane-deployed aerosols, antenna arrays like HAARP, and other similar technologies. But the issue that this HAARP memo acknowledged was that even back then, and still today, they had a problem, in quotes you see, with being unable to distinguish between, quote, ladies and gentlemen, what happens when a hurricane is modified by human intervention versus a hurricane's natural behavior, end quote. Not only did they have lacking proof that their efforts made any difference, but they were also drowning in the downpour of what is so often termed plausible deniability. Nevertheless, research was to move forward and, quote, weather modification efforts might again become viable. Did somebody sniff out a jackpot? All this discussion was taking place during the Obama administration. God only knows what really happened during Bush's Katrina. Under Obama, Sandy was a nasty mess for New York and New Jersey, and now the world is at present compelled to stare into the face of destruction in Houston and Florida, all at a time when war isn't selling and some bigwigs need a new disaster.
You never want a serious crisis to go to waste. And what I mean by that, it's an opportunity to do things that you think you could not do before.
You never let a serious crisis go to waste. Imagine the problems that could create for a public that A, forgot its government has admittedly steered the weather, and B, can't tell the difference between genuine, albeit weird and over-the-top weather, and weather that is, well, less than authentic and something more than a mad scientist's wet dream. Things are already poised to devolve into alternating rounds of anarchy and martial law, so what else could go wrong? They themselves admit that the blowback can be quite literal, and that efforts, ostensibly of course, to weaken and diffuse major storms could instead put the storm on steroids and bolster its course for a dense population center near you. Where there's a will, there's a way, and where there's a quote emergency coordinator, trouble is sure to follow. Just when your neighbors thought this wasn't possible, it turns out that it was on record all along. Oh, and they've tested it out on snowstorms, lightning storms, rainstorms, and whatever other storms might traverse the land. What will happen this time, or the next? And will it be Mother Nature to blame, or Mother Government? Who knows, but keep your eye on the ball, or the swirling eye of the storm. Somewhere in there, maybe that elusive, hidden hand. And, of course, in quotes.
Today it's going to be pretty nice, though, if you had thought about evacuation, if you have been ordered to evacuate, if it's a voluntary evacuation, whatever. Pretty nice weather to be out and about and getting to your shelters.
The U.S. has gone without an ambassador to the Bahamas, a fact China is now taking advantage of. One America's Pearson Sharp explains how U.S. neglect for the island nation has given China a foothold on America's doorstep.
Since 2011, the United States has gone without an ambassador to the Bahamas. The Caribbean island nation is small, with a population of only about 400,000, but it attracts a lot of U.S. tourism, and sitting just 50 miles off the coast of Florida, it's right in the middle of one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. That fact hasn't gone unnoticed by the Chinese. China has set its sights on the Bahamas and has invested billions in building new infrastructure and industry across the country. New roads, new businesses, new hotels, and booming Chinese immigration has led to many businesses being staffed with more Chinese workers than local Bahamians. Reports show over 200,000 Chinese are illegally smuggled into the Caribbean every year to open up their own shops or work at Chinese businesses, with many sending their money back to China. Officials say these practices are crowding out small retailers, and by selling inferior goods and using Chinese workers for what amounts to slave labor, they're putting locals out of business. Chinese state banks are also putting up tens of millions of dollars for building projects like new ports and bridges, as well as a huge new Chinese embassy in the heart of downtown Nassau. The Chinese government even gifted a new national stadium to the Bahamas to the tune of $50 million. And China's state-owned Export-Import Bank dropped nearly $3 billion to put up the luxurious Baha Ma Resort in New Providence. Thanks to investments like these, some analysts go as far as to say China now owns the Bahamas. These developments paint a grim picture for the future of one of America's closest neighbors. But what alternative does the Bahamas have? According to the Bahamian government, they simply can't afford to build huge projects like these on their own. So, with China stepping in and essentially colonizing the Bahamas, where does that leave the United States? Washington is choosing to remain on the sidelines as China swoops in to develop strategic real estate right on America's front door. And now, some 55 miles east of Palm Beach, China is building a massive new shipping port, a strategic location which could be used for military vessels and submarines. China already has a military presence in the Caribbean, occupying old Soviet bases in Cuba. But could Washington soon have to deal with the reality of Chinese warships off the coast of Florida? But China isn't the only reason the U.S. should be concerned. The Bahamas are also a major gateway for drugs, weapons, and illegal aliens coming into America. While Mexico comes to mind when many think of U.S. border security, the Bahamas just received a Tier 1 ranking from the State Department for human trafficking. And although the Bahamas historically has imported most of its trade goods from the U.S., such as agriculture, the country is beginning to turn to China to fill those demands, costing American companies their business. In 2017, President Trump nominated San Diego developer and veteran industrialist Doug Manchester for the role of U.S. ambassador to the Bahamas. Yet in the 2 years since then, Congress has stalled on his confirmation. With the Bahamian economy struggling on its own and China building inroads, the United States could seize an opportunity to step in and help the Bahamas create jobs and improve economic performance. That's a role traditionally filled by an ambassador. While some consider the appointment a plum position, the alternative is leaving the post vacant while crime grows and China sinks its claws into the island unopposed. Reducing crime, fighting human and drug trafficking, as well as building infrastructure would not only benefit the Bahamas, but the safety and security of the United States as well. Pearson Sharp, One American News. Some 55 miles east of Palm Beach, China is building a massive new shipping port, a strategic location which could be used for military vessels and submarines.
A new day dawning for the island of Abaco as a major development is taking place in that community. A number of jobs will be provided, giving the economy a big boost. Today, a number of officials attended the groundbreaking ceremony for the new port on that island. Janae Noel Ferguson reports from Abaco tonight.
Ground was broken for a $39 million port facility in Cooperstown, Abaco Friday. A partnership with the People's Republic of China and the Bahamian government.
It will start operation by the end of this year and become a new growth point of the local economy. We also have every reason to believe that this port project that starts construction today will promote economic development and employment for the country, especially for ABACOS Island.
Thursday, the community of North Abaco could be reaping the financial rewards as the port facility there is near completion. The nation's chief and other government officials recently toured the construction site to see its progress. Our Clint Watson was also there.
The North Abaco port is to provide economic relief to residents and investors from Crown Haven to Treasure Key. To put this 44-acre North Abaco port facility into context, when completed, it will be 3 times the size of the Marsh Harbor port. It includes 5 buildings, an international, domestic, and commanding craft warehouses, as well as a security building. Project manager Francis Clark says currently northern residents travel up to 120 miles round trip, which translates to about 3 hours, and big bucks in gas and vehicle maintenance. But aside from that, it also reduces the cost of development.
They have to bring in their goods all the way from Marsh Harbor, maybe Grand Bahama, or even the U.S. directly, and that's costly. The purpose of it all, right, is to boost the economy.
It's taking about 2 years to complete the port, contracted at a value pegged around $33 million. Opening date is set for December. It's being funded by a loan agreement between the government and the China Exim Bank. China Harboring is heading up the construction.
Keys around Abaco. It will have a marina that boats will be able to use and be able to have safe harbor, and fishermen will be able to use. So the whole challenge for us now as a government and for Abaco is to ensure that the port is justified and the expenditure on the port is justified by linkages that we will establish.
The Prime Minister says they are in the final stages of a port in East Grand Bahama, and so in his view, there is a real possibility of doing ferry services for people working in one island and living in the next. Clint Watson, ZNS.
track actually sits there for quite a while. So not only are the big radars on the coast of Florida helping to create this ionospheric heater downdraft, HAARP downburst, but some big Navy ship is off in this direction. These are British ships, but this is the type of ship that can produce a beam like that. You know, 1,000,000 watts, continuous power, extremely high resolution computer aim. It's actually shooting so low that it's evaporating these cloud tops. So it's a collective effort and a covert effort to make it look like, oh, the hurricane has an eye. It's not an eye. This is not an eye. So let's think about the legalistic issue here. So this storm formed maybe 2,000 miles to the east. It's just meandering along pretty much normally until it gets to the coast of Florida. Then suddenly it stops, like slamming on the brakes, and then starts going up parallel to the coast. Does anybody see anything strange here? And the official version for this strange behavior, we're being told, is there's a high pressure off to the east, high pressure off to the west, and it's steering Hurricane Dorian. Yes, sure. Are we really that stupid that we're going to buy this? I think the reality of this situation is that Hurricane Dorian was parked over Grand Bahama Island using the Florida coastal ionospheric heaters to hold it in place until the Navy ships could get far enough west and get into position so that they could weaken it and drive it north. So Hurricane Grand Bahama and Abaco Island were sacrificed because of the Hurricane Futures contract on Florida. And if you go to cmegroup.com, Chicago Mercantile Exchange, you can download this PDF that describes their Hurricane Futures options. Why would they have this downloadable by the public if these hurricane index futures and options contracts were not currently available? They've got all these legalistic terms, trading rules, when they pay out, and here's the interesting thing, the locations. We know Florida is covered. Florida is absolutely covered by this futures contract here, and Brownsville to Florida border. The one that's not covered is Florida to North Carolina, Virginia border, and this is actually called the HSA contract. And if you go look at that up as a NASDAQ ticker, it doesn't come up. It comes up as some other thing, because this is traded via open outcry in the NASDAQ 100 pit. In other words, they don't keep a digital record. You can't look up, gee, how many people have HSA contracts and what are they paying for them right now? Why am I saying that the HSA contract is not paid? It's because Hurricane Dorian is pretty much expected to make landfall in Southern Carolina and tear up Northern Carolina, and then here's where the Virginia border is. That's where this contract ends. So it goes all the way from Florida to the Virginia border. So somebody didn't pay for that contract, but they sure as hell paid for the Florida contract.
So, I've done a lot of research on weather modification as it pertains to electricity, and I really wanted to put this one to rest. So I spent years trying to search down how could a NEXRAD radar possibly control the weather, and I go through a lengthy article. These are all the stations, not just NEXRAD. There's the terminal Doppler weather radars, joint surveillance system, integrated ocean observing system. These are all Doppler radars across America that I mapped out back in 2012. And power sources, as you can see, they are generally 750 kilowatts. And what we're talking about is the WSR-88D. These are Weather Service Radar 88D or NEXRAD radars. So I really wanted to, break down the science behind it and find a cause. And the only thing that I could really find that was pretty definitive was found in something called the Supplemental Environmental Assessment of the Effects of Electromagnetic Radiation from the WSR-88D radar. And these are NEXRAD radars. So if you look in the environmental effects section, one thing really jumped off the page at me, and it's called searchlight mode. A searchlight mode will be used infrequently for maintenance and testing purposes only. During searchlight mode operation, the WSR-88D beam will be directed at a fixed location for up to 5 minutes at a time. Because the beam will be stationary, average power densities will be higher than during normal operation. And each time the searchlight mode is to be used, safety measures will be followed to make significant impacts very unlikely. However, on here, you know, looking at the NEXRAD radar, quite frequently we will see what's called searchlight mode, where you'll see a single pencil beam, you know, coming out of a radar. I have several examples of those images on here, where, you know, it just shows a single beam coming out. Let me find one real quick. Scrolling, very long article. And I go through a lot of the anomalous stuff that happens, but there's one right there. This is a NEXRAD in searchlight mode. And as you can see, it's not spinning. It's got a single fixed location. And that's what they're talking about, that it could heat up the atmosphere in that location if used for more than 5 minutes. We've seen multiple times where NEXRADs have been literally in a fixed location for an entire day. So just pointing that out for you. This is what a pencil beam looks like. This is what it looks like when it's in searchlight mode, as you can see here. You know, they call them sunbursts sometimes. There's out of Florida, multiple, you know, just straight beams coming out of these NEXRAD radars. So,
really zoomed in on the southern part of Florida here. I want you to notice the rain bands that are associated with the storm stretch all the way up to North Carolina. I think that might be something that you might want to pay attention to, dude. How come he's not talking about the rain bands that are literally growing before our very eyes, that stretch all the way up to North Carolina? I think this is a serious omission on the part of the National Hurricane Center. Another thing I want to point out, this is just an oddity that I find all over our national radar here, are these strange little laser straight rain bands. They reflect as rain bands on our thing, and you have this right angle here. What is going on here? What is this? What are these? We get these straight rain bands, and they're everywhere. We have one in Michigan. It looks like a seatbelt on Michigan. We have one in Texas. We have them in Nevada. We have them down here in California. They're everywhere. Nebraska. These are just crazy things, but there's definitely one brewing here.
Modification is a real thing in addition to electrical weather modification, and I wanted to point this one out for you. This is from 2013. Hurricane hacking. The Department of Homeland Security enters the weather modification business. Now in 2008, I'm going to skip past all of this timeline stuff at the top. At the David Skaggs Research Center in Boulder, Colorado, the Department of Homeland Security had a hurricane modification workshop. And as you can see right here, here's the photo of that, presentation they did. And interestingly enough, examples of what they wanted to do was limited scale field tests, and in there, ion generators. So even at the Department of Homeland Security, this was brought about because of Katrina. The DHS said that they wanted to prevent another Katrina because of the billions of dollars of damage it, caused. And they said that they wanted to get with scientists and figure out ways to either weaken the storms or, change the direction of the storms. But if you scroll through this, you'll see that Mosh Alamaro from MIT, he specifically talked about the carbon black dust idea, and you can see it right here. How to halt a hurricane. Fleet of transport aircraft flying 50,000 feet drop soot in the path of the targeted hurricane. The soot cloud is heated by the sun. Soot is warmed by the sun, heating cool air around it at the very top of the hurricane. This reduces the flows of air within the hurricane and slows it down. As everybody's noted, Hurricane Florence is slowing down and going very slowly. And that in turn modifies the track of the storm. Depending on where the soot is dropped, the now weakened hurricane will change course.
Major geopolitical development this time in Italy, reportedly set to become the first major European country to formally endorse China's One Belt One Road initiative, a plan to build out infrastructure across more than 80 countries, encompassing 1/3 of the world's trade. It is an initiative that has received strong criticism from the U.S. administration. It also comes at a time of increased scrutiny around China's investments, with Germany and France recently worrying that the country could seek to divide the Eurozone. This is data we pulled from the World Bank, which kind of gives you a blueprint of China's One Belt One Road initiative, which kicked off about 5 years ago. You can see, though, it is certainly making headway here, and getting Italy, a G7 country, Carl, on board would significantly help it expand its reach into Europe.
Typhoon Lakima has rapidly intensified overnight and is now a Category 5 storm on the Saffir-Simpson scale, with winds of 160 miles per hour and a pressure of 940 millibars, verified by Force 13 SATID, its way of measuring the satellite estimate of the storm. On the CDPS, it is also now a Stage 9 on the Cyclone Destruction Potential scale for Ishigaki in the southernmost Ryukyu Islands. The damage potential is extreme. This storm is extreme and is still intensifying. Its current position right now is at 21.7 north, 126.9 degrees east at 10 p.m. local time in China and Taiwan, August 7th, 11 p.m. Japan time, with sea surface temperatures 30 degrees plus, wind shear remaining low. Further intensification is possible as it reaches those southernmost Japanese islands. Looking at those models there, they could, the storm could brush the coast near Shanghai and then follow the outline of the coast of China. So here is where the storm is right now and how it has been looking in those. Frames. It really is a recent development, but the appearance has been looking good enough for a good 4 hours to support Category 5 status at this point, which is
当地的村民介绍，最早呢是当地的党员干部和村民。
拿门子丢下去！拉开，好了。
That is underway right now. Students and workers all around the world are flooding the streets demanding action on climate change. Maggie Rulli is at a demonstration in London with the latest.
Michael, we're here with thousands of protesters right underneath Parliament. And what's so striking, besides just the sheer size of protesters here, are the age of people who are demonstrating. Almost all of them are students. This group behind me, just 9 years old. We spoke to a group of 17-year-olds who said they're here today to fight for their future. Now, the goal of this strike, and really all these strikes around the world, is to send a clear message to world leaders ahead of the UN Climate Summit happening this week in New York. And one of their many demands is to say they want to phase out all fossil fuels by 2030 and replace them with renewable energy. First kind of solo climate strike, and now look at what her movement has become. We don't know exact numbers yet, guys, but it's looking like this could be the largest climate protest in our planet's history. Tom?
All right, Maggie, really.
Epic piece. Explain what you found and what you mean by your title, The Battle for Paradise. Puerto Ricans and ultra-rich Puertopians are locked in a pitched struggle over how to remake the island.
What I'm referring to is that in this moment when so much attention is focused on the failures of FEMA, the failures of the entire relief and reconstruction project, as it rightly should be, because this is an ongoing humanitarian emergency, we're seeing this strategy that we've seen in many other disaster zones that we've spoken about many times, which is exploiting that state of shock and distraction and emergency to push through a radical corporate agenda.
Noticed this yesterday, and said, what in the world? See, the Doppler beam is actually going out further than it probably used to be able to. They found a way to give it more reach. It wasn't KLIX that was heating up. Yesterday we pulled this up and it looked like there was something coming out of here that was heating up. It didn't make any sense. But here you could clearly see the beam that ends up affecting the weather. What? I mean, how do you explain this?
In this simulation, I want to briefly discuss a transverse wave and some of the things that you can measure by observing a transverse wave. The first thing you need to recognise is that a transverse wave is generated by a vibration. You'll note that the vibration of the particle is actually perpendicular to the direction of the wave that's going out the window. And each particle is doing exactly the same thing. They're simply vibrating vertically, in this case, the direction of the wave, which is horizontal. And if you look at each of the green dots, and I can slow it down for you to make it a little bit easier, you can clearly see that each particle is simply vibrating perpendicular to the direction of the wave. Now if I pause the wave, you'll notice a couple of things. First of all, there is an amplitude. The amplitude is simply the maximum height that the wave has. In this case, it's measured from the top of the crest to the equilibrium line. Of course, the amplitude can also be measured from the equilibrium line down to the bottom of the trough.
it's actually not difficult to design an antenna that has a narrow beam. It turns out that the bigger you make your antenna, the narrower its beam is. An example of this could be the big satellite and TV antennas that your parents had back in the day. But the problem with these is that they're big and heavy, so if you want to turn it to point it in a different direction, it's difficult to do and it's slow. So we need something better than this, and that's where phased array antennas come into play. So a phased array of antennas is essentially a group of antennas, which could be our small light bulb-like antennas, that are placed next to each other, either in a rectangular grid, or in the simplest case, just in a line. Each of these antennas sends out the same signal, and we notice a very interesting result, and that is that as the sinusoidal waves that the antennas send out travel outwards, they constructively and destructively interfere with each other, so that if we've designed our array correctly, they all add together into a narrow beam in one specific direction, but they cancel each other out in all other directions. We can then look at this array as just a single composite antenna, which has a very narrow beam, which is exactly what we said that we wanted. Now, in most practical systems, you'll have dozens, maybe even hundreds of antennas, which allow the beam to get narrower and narrower and more closely approximate that laser pointer-like antenna that we talked about. Now, you might wonder what we've gained since we just traded a big antenna for a bunch of small antennas, which probably add up to the same size. Well, the answer lies in how easy it is to change the direction of the phased array antenna. So we saw before that if we send out the exact same signal from each of the antennas, that they add together to form a narrow beam that's perpendicular to the antennas. But it turns out that if we add a slight time delay to each of the signals that we send out from each antenna, that direction in which they add together into that narrow beam changes. And that new direction depends on how much time delay we add to each of the signals. And time delay is really easy to do in digital processing, which is perfect because now we have an antenna that has a narrow beam and we can steer that beam back and forth just with a little bit of digital processing, which is very fast. And we don't even have to worry about moving this big, heavy antenna back and forth.
"5G would be driven by a lot of new technologies. On the other hand, 5G would push through other technologies to a new level, such as the Internet of Things, games, smart cities, smart homes, self-driving cars, remote operations, machine learnings, and you name it. 5G is coming with a lot of potentials and possibilities. Some we know now, but there's more we do not know. But overall, the future looks bright. In Donald Trump's style of speech, it would be great. Very, very great. In the near future, you might see such small cells everywhere in your neighborhood. The fourth new technology is called beamforming. In 4G, the wireless signals, if not omnidirectional, are spreading over a large area as they travel. Thus, signals tend to lose energy more quickly. To make things worse, different users might interfere with each other if they are standing close. Beamforming makes the transmission between the users and the base or cell stations more directional. It can be visualized as laser beam between them so that signals seem like traveling along an invisible cable. The high density of beamforming leads to less interference and less energy consumption, and thus a faster data rate can be achieved.
into it now. Look at my mouth. See what's happening? So, I mean, this is about the strongest that I've ever stood in at about 90 miles per hour. Wow. We're at 100.
Nobody is standing at 125 miles an hour. So any reporter that says that, it's not happening.
There you go. So much for the eye. Went down to this boat down here, took some pictures. The gear's getting really wet. But it's beautiful when the wind shifted. All this started lighting up photo possibilities. I saw shingles flying off of the roofs while I was out there messing around. It's tough, and if you get stuck out there, you're in a bad way.
And Jim, let's talk about just the amazing shot you got of the actual eye of this hurricane. It's something you have told us in the past you didn't expect that you would ever capture.
It's a very rare shot. It's something I said, nobody's ever going to get a shot like that. I mean, we could think that, okay, it's going to be stadium effect and blue sky, round, but you never saw it, except from a hurricane hunter aircraft. They see it quite frequently.
You've got to go through almost unspeakable violence to be able to see a sight like that.
Sure. What I went through in the aftermath, nobody, you may say you want a shot like that, but let me tell you, just be glad you weren't there. The aftermath was horrendous, and I'm not touching another storm the rest of the year.
The National Weather Service confirms a tornado touchdown at 12:40 a.m. Power 5 meteorologist Mark Johnson warned us about this severe weather threat. In fact, he began tracking this part of the storm as it gathered steam over Mayfield Heights. It touched down as a twister in Chesterland and caused major damage to the only supermarket there.
Indeed, we were online from 7 o'clock yesterday evening all the way until 3 a.m. this morning tracking these storms in. I hope you got to join us on our severe weather chat. Let's show you the archive of the weather event as it came through. Let me put this map into motion a little bit. Now, we first noticed this severe thunderstorm cell potentially doing some damage right over Mayfield Heights. Right there, boom, you see those little spinning circles? And right there is Chesterland, where that circle ends. Now, once again, I'm going to take you to the latest here. A couple of things I want you to note. Here's what we saw happening. We saw this little gust front coming in from this side. The storms to the north produced a wall of wind that came off Lake Erie and moved toward the south. That's the gust front right here, and you can actually see it on the Power 5, meeting up with this north-south thunder cell. This is what we call a little triple point in meteorology. This is a big spin-up where these two little fronts meet, and that's why the tornado was produced right over Chesterland. But once again, you could see the tornado forming right about there, right over Mayfield Heights, and we saw it moving off toward the east-southeast right into Chesterland. It lasted about 10 minutes doing EF1 damage. That means on the Fujita scale, that's about a 95-mile-an-hour wind, enough to take off roofs, take down trees, power lines, and wait till you see the giant eagle. It just totally devastated that grocery store. I'll tell you if there's any more thunder in your weekend forecast when we come back.
Mike Bettis came here and he got to 133.
And I think we just made the record there.
So that gave me something to shoot for. And I thought I could get there and certainly go past that.
33, 34, 35.
When he passed Mike's record at 133, and that's a Category 4.
At 135, it's like you can't really take a breath of air because there's just so much force even on your mouth. I mean, you could tell just by the way my skin was black.
Stations. Now that we are this close to American soil, I can finally take my time and wander through the data with you and show you all sorts of interesting observations. Now, here's the problem. As I get the location, which is longitude and latitude, and I plot it on the map, for example, the 8 o'clock reading from yesterday told us that the winds extended out only 60 miles. And so the hurricane strength winds only extended out 60 miles. So I couldn't track Dorian or substantiate hurricane strength winds simply because there wasn't a buoy around anywhere. At 8 o'clock in the morning yesterday, at 11 o'clock in the morning yesterday, at 2 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, I want you to look at this. This storm, you guys, conveniently stayed over 60 and 70 miles away from any buoy it could possibly have come into contact with. Very, very frustrating, except for this morning. Finally, and now, folks, I'm so excited to report to you that we have 4104 as the 11 o'clock location. Yes, so forecaster Bevan told us that these winds are now near 110 miles an hour. They were near 110 miles an hour before they hit buoy number 41004, and according to the 2 o'clock update, they are near 110 miles an hour now that they have passed over Buoy number 41004. A storm like this was passing over that buoy. That's exactly what we would expect to see. We would expect to see this storm have no wind right when it passed over that buoy, and that's what we see. We're up to 29, we're up to 44, 52, 44, 52, 60, 64. Folks, we have a hurricane. We have one reading at 2:10 p.m. for 64 knots, and then it starts dropping down again per hour. They weren't. They were strong winds. You know, the strongest one we see here is 52 knots before, or 56.3 knots. So let's see what happens at 56.3 knots. 56 knots. That's almost 64 miles an hour. That's strong tropical wind, but it is not. It's not a hurricane. In other words, you guys, the way that the National Hurricane Center has been drafting these infomercials here is to couch it within some very deceptive language. You can just look at the graph here. The temperatures dropped down to 32 degrees and raised up to 80 and dropped down to 25. I mean, this was absolutely crazy data. So this is the one I want to show you. Okay, at 12 o'clock, this is at midnight, the temperatures were 34 degrees. They dropped down to, this is where everything else around here is in the 70s and 80s. Then they raised, let me see, did they get down to a full freezing? I don't think they did, but they're very, very close. Then they started going up. This is at 1 o'clock in the morning, they're up to 44. Almost 2 o'clock in the morning, they're up to 50 at 2 o'clock degrees still. Temperatures go up to 84 degrees at 7:04. Finally, the sun is rising now. We've got 86 degrees. And then almost 86 here at 85.9. And then something strange happens. As the sun rises, what happens to the temperature here, folks? 82, 81, 77, 64, 56, 52, 45, 38. This is with the sun rising, people. 35, 34, 32.6 degrees at 11 a.m. What the heck is going on? What is going on, folks? The dew point dropped to 24.5. Would you look at these temperatures? Then they started rising again. But here we go. Let's look at the high. Look at this. The temperature fluctuation on this day. The high is 93 degrees and the low is 32 degrees. That's for today alone.
Have described to us how a huge wave came from the north and swept through this area, destroying everything in its path. We'd have been underwater here a couple of days ago. You can see where the water was at the top of that debris, and it was such a powerful surge that it brought cars that are now stuck in the debris here, and a whole manner of things across here, chairs, TV monitors swept out of people's homes. It came through, destroyed and brought out towards the ocean, which they can now see here because everything has been flattened.
We must intensify our deliberations and commitments to addressing climate change. Climate change is a clear and present danger to us all, but in particular to low-lying coastal nations like the Bahamas and parts of the United States of America face the onslaught of Category 4 or higher hurricanes. As Hurricane Irma hurled towards the Bahamas, my government took the difficult decision to evacuate residents from the southern islands to prevent the loss of lives and injury. Gratefully, we escaped without loss of life, but our southern neighbors were not as fortunate. As such, I fully support Secretary General his plan to call a climate summit next September to mobilize action and financial support.
On the ground, live on ABACO right now. Steve, what are you seeing? What are you hearing?
Shepard, I'm standing in what used to be somebody's house here on Abaco Island. Just the foundation is left, and really in what used to be somebody's neighborhood, because as far as I can see behind me, off to the right, off to the left, there is nothing left here. It's as if someone took a snow globe and just shook it over and over again. This is not the kind of hurricane that just tears the roof off a house. It's the kind of hurricane that hit here with 185 mile per hour winds for 2 days. You mentioned the body count. That is going to change dramatically because when you stand here, you can smell bodies. I can see dead dogs from where I'm standing, and when I walked with Chris Pontius over that hill to a church there, you could actually see dead bodies protruding from the rocks.
Abaco. Let's go, go to Abaco. Bahamas there is yellow and blue. They fly all over for me and you. So tell me, gal, what you gonna do? Hey man, let's go, go to Abaco. Yeah, let's go, go to Abaco. Music man. The rooster's rest is very sad. So don't you ever, ever forget to come on over and do your thing. 'Cause baby, you know it's my game. Hey man, let's go, go to Abaco. Let's go, go to Abaco. To Abaco. Let's go, go to Abaco. Bahamas there is yellow and blue. They fly all over for me and you. So tell me, gal, what you gonna do? Hey man, let's go, go to Abaco. Yeah, let's go, go to Abaco. Music man. The rooster's rest is very sad. So don't you ever, ever forget to come on over and do your thing. 'Cause baby, you know it's my game. Hey man, let's go, go to Abaco. Let's go, go to Abaco.